So next up, we've got Cressida Wilson. No mai haere mai Cressida, ki tēnei huirangi. Cressida Wilson is a PhD student at the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies, and they are researching gender and animal advocacy in Aotearoa. Cressida has also been significantly involved in the animal rights movement, including being the role of campaign manager for the New Zealand Anti-Vivisection Society before their PhD. I'm really excited because Celebrity Hegans was originally going to be launched at the Aotearoa Animal Rights Conference in April before COVID came along. And so I'm really happy that we're getting to hear it now. No mai haere mai Cressida.
Kia ora tātou, ko Cressida toku ingoa. Thank you so much to all the other speakers and the organisers. Thank you to Amy and Mark, but a special thank you to Catherine, who I think is really the MVP of the animal rights movement. So I'm so happy to be here. So I'm a PhD student at the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies, and I'll be talking about part of my research today. So hopefully you should all be able to see my screen now. So I'm talking today about Celebrity Hegans, an analysis of YouTube animal advocates. Okay, so the research I'm going to be talking about today is only one small part of a bigger project. So my main goal with my PhD is to highlight the experiences of women, both cis and trans, non-binary, trans and intersex animal advocates in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Particular areas of interest which led me to this research are how gender and activism intersect, how gender informs activism, and what kinds of activism are idealized or celebrated versus normalized and made mundane. So what inspired this research was that when I first became vegan, I was quite isolated from other vegans. So me and my partner were the only vegans that we knew. But then I started working for, as Catherine said, the New Zealand Anti-Vivisection Society, and I started getting to know more about the animal rights movement in Aotearoa, which was awesome in lots of ways, and I'm so grateful for that community. But it also made me aware of some problems, particularly the unacknowledged work that women and non-binary and trans people do in the Aotearoa animal rights movement versus kind of hyper-celebrated, hyper-visible celebrity animal advocates. So I decided that as part of my PhD, I wanted to look at some of the most influential animal advocates via YouTube. My position as researcher is complex, but it's important to say. So I'm Pākehā, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm fat, I'm not disabled, but I do live with mental illness, and I'm middle class. So my identity is intersecting in various ways. And so I'm always going to be looking at my findings through that lens, which is important to acknowledge. And I just thought I would clarify whether or not I support vegan YouTubers. I don't not support them. I think there are some really awesome people doing mahi through YouTube on behalf of animals, but there are also people who I don't actively support for some of the reasons that I'm going to discuss today. So I just thought I would give a little bit of context in terms of some of the things that happen in animal advocacy that concern me. All of these examples that I've put on here are actually from the United States, I'm pretty sure. But basically when the Me Too movement started, there was kind of a an animal rights Me Too version that also sort of came to the fore, where it was kind of discovered, but I think it had been like a not so much a secret. People knew that this was going on, that there were particularly heterosexual white men in the animal rights movement who were kind of taking advantage of their power to abuse people. So a lot of these instances here are from nonprofits in the United States where CEOs and high-level men were like sexually abusing interns and that sort of thing, using the power that they had been given within the animal advocacy movement to abuse others. And while nothing this high profile has happened in Aotearoa, at least to my knowledge in the last couple of years, I think there have been similar occurrences, but on a smaller scale that haven't been made super public in this way, where particularly men are given a lot of power and are kind of enabled to abuse others because of that power. So vegan YouTubers became a particular area of interest for me because, as I said, the mahi of women, femmes, non-binary people was going unnoticed and uncelebrated. So I became interested in what the most celebrated forms of activism looked like. So my aims were to find and analyze common themes in animal advocacy YouTubers, to analyze how gender informs celebrity animal advocacy, and to highlight how gender identity is performed on YouTube in animal advocacy. I started out with a really clear focus on gender, but actually my findings have kind of surprised me in that I don't think that the way that YouTubers do gender is the most interesting thing. I mean, it is interesting and I think it's important to note, but now I think that what is my most important finding from this research is how the YouTubers are actually agents of neoliberalism, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go along. So I had to collate a data set to do this research. So to do that, I used a variety of search terms on YouTube. Because I was mostly interested in animal advocacy, I used search terms like animal advocacy, like veganism, like vegan advocacy, that sort of thing to find my data set. But I removed anyone who didn't talk about veganism on behalf of animals. So they had to be talking about animals to be included in my data set. And they also needed to bodily feature in the videos. So there are some vegan YouTubers who only put up, for instance, videos like graphic videos of animals being slaughtered. They weren't included because I wanted to see how they were performing gender physically. So they had to feature in the videos to be included in my data set. And to keep my data set manageable, I only included vegan YouTubers who had over 1 million views. So that I was kind of making the assumption that if they had over 1 million views, that they were fairly influential, the most celebrated or notorious YouTubers. And this was my data set, so 13 YouTube channels. And we can see already quite a few things just from the data set. It's mostly men, 10 out of the 13 are men by themselves. There are 2 heterosexual couples and 1 woman by herself. They're mostly white. They are almost all from Western countries. None of them are obviously disabled. I would also say that all of them pretty much are heterosexual. I'm making some assumptions here, but yeah. So there's already, just on my data set, there's a lack of diversity already in terms of who they are. So then I'll go on to talk about my findings. sorry, I know I'm going a bit quickly, but I just have so much to get through and I wasn't sure what would be the most interesting for people to hear about. So if anyone wants me to clarify about any of the particular themes later on, then they can ask me and that's absolutely great. So my first theme is individualism. And so by individualism, I mean not only the political ideology of the power of the individual, but also the importance of these particular individuals. So I think that celebrity culture is really, this is something I'm still muddling through, but I really think that celebrity culture is kind of a product of individualism and neoliberalism, where individualism emphasizes the moral worth of the individual and self-reliance, and neoliberalism kind of perpetuates this idea that success comes from hard work. And so when someone is rich and successful, they are special somehow, more special than the rest of us. And then I divided individualism into two sub-themes, the first of which is conversion event. So quite a few of the YouTubers discuss this kind of road to Damascus style epiphany, where they change from their old bad way of eating to a new pure animal-free way of eating. So you can see down on the bottom left that there's a picture from one of James Espy's talks. So he talks about his conversion event, and a particular person that he talks about in his conversion event is this Indian man that he meets on a cruise ship. And so the Indian man tells him that eating animals is bad karma. And this is like this kind of like, I don't know, amazing epiphany for James Espy. But I mean, I think that this is a really problematic kind of trope of an Indian person that he's using in this kind of orientalized version of what an Indian man is, that they're kind of the spiritual guide to his journey towards a vegan lifestyle. And I also think that the conversion event stories are really interesting because obviously they're curated, they're simplified into a narrative that we can clearly understand, and also because they go from meat eaters to vegans immediately, most of them, which kind of suggests that this is what should happen for everyone. I don't know if that is necessarily accurate. I think it's more complex than that quite a lot of the time. But yeah, they're kind of suggesting that they learn something and then they suddenly become vegan. And I mean, I certainly have people in my life who know exactly what happens in animal farming and they still don't become vegan for whatever reason. The second sub-theme is the efficacy of their own activism. So I think this is important to note that they're actually curating themselves to be a product. They have to legitimize why they are particularly effective. So almost all of these people are asking for money via their Patreons or via their websites. So similar to nonprofits, they have to kind of prove that every donation is a good investment. And so down here, down the bottom right, we have Gary Yourofsky talking about what an effective activist he is because he's been banned from 5 countries so far and arrested 13 times. The way he discusses his own activism is really interesting because he attempts to depoliticize it. He says like, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I don't wear tie-dye hippie shirts, I'm an activist and that's the most important thing about me, which I think is really interesting, as if activism can be removed from other political ideas like being a Democrat or a Republican. Like we all know that being an activist is actually a super political thing to be. And then my second theme is explicit neoliberalism. And I say explicit because I think all the things that I found have really strong links to neoliberalism. So when I talk about neoliberalism, I'm talking about a political ideology that emphasizes free market capitalism, also has an emphasis on things like competition, choice, freedom, and lack of state involvement. So neoliberalism is the kind of current political ideology in which we live, particularly since the 1980s, it's been really dominant. So my first sub-theme is consumer power. And that's the idea that consumers wield political power through the purchases they make. And this is a really strong neoliberal ideology. And I think the problem with this is that it minimizes the role conglomerates play in the production of goods, while maximizing the role the individual consumer has in determining the rate of production. So most products are overproduced, including meat, dairy, and eggs. And due to the nature of capitalism, I'm just a bit skeptical that we should only be focusing on individual change. So it's kind of like the plastic bags thing, where the emphasis was all on individuals not using plastic bags. And then, of course, the supermarkets got involved and banned them. But there was never any emphasis on the plastic that conglomerates are using to produce their foodstuffs. Like there was never any discussion around like how every single bottle of Coke is in plastic. It was just like what we can do as individuals to minimize our plastic use. So I think that that is something that's really strongly talked about in vegan advocacy, is that this emphasis on the individual as opposed to any kind of trying to change the system at the top. And then my second sub-theme in explicit neoliberalism is how easy it is to be vegan. So the YouTubers quite often talk about how easy it is. You just have to, instead of grabbing the cow's milk, you grab the soy milk instead. And I think that this, while we have a lot of vegan products and that's awesome, I think it minimizes the emotional work that a lot of vegans have to do. So when I became vegan, that was a really rough time for me, actually, because I had kind of opened myself up to all this pain that all these animals were experiencing. And so it was actually quite a bad year for my mental health. And I think a lot of vegans do this, and it's a really hard transition, actually, because we're doing so much emotional work. And also so much time spent, because you can't just be a vegan and no one asks you why. You have to spend a lot of time going online, finding the answers for all these things that people are going to ask you questions about. So it's not like it's super easy. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And I think the emotional work was really, really hard, particularly for me, but I'm sure for lots of others as well. And I think also making out that it's super easy to be vegan minimizes the impact on people's social circles. So, there are certain people that I'm no longer friends with because of my veganism, because it was kind of too hard for them to accept that about me. Or, there's all these like wide-ranging, multifaceted impacts in our lives that come along with being vegan, with being an animal advocate. That when we make out it's just this super easy thing to do, I think we're actually being quite unfair on ourselves, on new vegans, and on the people we're kind of promoting veganism to. It's not an easy thing to do, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. And then the last sub-theme is how good it feels to be vegan, which I think is, it further marginalizes animals. When we talk about how good it feels for us individually to be vegan, it further moves animals away from the center, which I think as animal advocates, we should really be trying as much as possible to center them. I mean, we're always going to talk about animals with a human lens, and we can't really avoid that. But when we talk about like veganism, doing veganism because it feels great, because we feel healthy and we feel fit and we feel thin, that's not why I do veganism. That's not why I practice veganism. I practice veganism for the animals. It's very much a political praxis. And I think that when we talk about how good it feels, it just becomes one of many possible diets that we could choose. So my third theme is health discourses. So the first subtheme is a vegan health metamorphosis. So the YouTubers talk a lot about how veganism leads to this kind of like healthy body that we should all be striving for, which can be determined by their diets alone. My concern with this is that it alienates vegans and non-vegans with disabilities, with ongoing health issues, with mental illness. So, for example, I live with depression and an anxiety disorder, and my vegan diet doesn't make that better. And I think that health as a concept is something that we should always be trying to consume or purchase our way to. This is also a really neoliberal ideology. People aren't necessarily going to be healthy if they have certain types of disabilities or mental illness, and veganism doesn't cure all of that. And then diet culture, which is my particular nemesis of vegan advocacy. Diet culture is so pervasive in veganism. It's just, as a fat vegan, I have a lot of issues with diet culture being used as a reason to encourage people to go vegan. I think it alienates fat vegans like me. We're deviant vegans. We don't have the right kind of body. And I think it also positions fat non-vegans as particular agents of the animal industrial complex. Like, fat non-vegans are the problem, are the reason why animals are being slaughtered in such numbers, which just isn't true. So there's lots of visual stuff about fat people, particularly by the vegan activist, who's one of the channels. So down on the bottom, he says, we don't need to eat dead animals to be healthy, but if we do, eventually they will kill us. So, you know, and using a fat person's body as the background to remind us of what we don't want to be, to what we're trying to move away from as much as possible. And actually, Corey Wren, who's a vegan scholar, has done a study about fat vegans, and she found that fat vegans avoid in-person activism. So fat vegans find it much more comfortable to do their activism online, because when they go out on the street or to groups or whatever, they find so much, they're further marginalized by the vegan groups that they're in, and so they tend to stay home and do their activism online, where it's less obvious that they're fat. So this has a real impact on fat vegans who want to do animal advocacy. And then theme 4, perpetuating the marginalization of other humans. So the YouTubers participate in marginalization of other humans. So they other different cultures. So particularly they talk about other cultures who do things that we as white Western people find morally repugnant. So they talk about, you know, how in Yulin they have the dog meat festival, and while maybe that's useful for kind of pointing out that what we eat is defined by culture and historical context, what it does is cement ideas about what Chinese people are, you know, like perpetuating stereotypes that Chinese people eat dogs. Or, you know, they talk about, Earthling Ed talks about female genital mutilation, and, you know, how awful that is, and how that's not like an acceptable thing to do in the context of like the white West. But I think that it's just a little bit lazy. You could just say, you know, people in different historical periods and different cultures eat different animals, and people would understand that. Like, I quite often tell people about how the ancient Romans ate mice, and there's no impact on anyone now. Like, no one's thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to be racist towards ancient Romans, because they literally don't exist anymore. And it's there's no impact on any culture that I don't belong to. And then whiteness. So as I said when I showed you the data set, almost all of the people doing animal advocacy on YouTube at this kind of high level where they're getting over 1 million views are white. And I think that this is particularly prevalent because it's obvious because they don't talk about race, or they only talk about race as this kind of abstract idea. And I think that what is most insidious about whiteness is that it is invisibilized as the norm, while other races are marginalized. So when they're not talking about race, when they're not talking about racism, they're further centering whiteness. And then the last theme I'm going to talk about, which is performing masculinity. So this is where I started out being, this is what drew me to vegan YouTubers, is the most interesting thing, which, as I've said, I actually think it's kind of boring how they do gender, but they do certainly perform masculinity. They use masculine identifiers, so that when they're talking to other men, they say bro, they say dude, they say man, which effectively alienates non-men from the conversations that they're having. They interrupt people, which is a really masculine way of asserting gender dominance in discourse. So there at the top is Joey Carbstrong, and he's talking to a woman, and she's saying, oh, if I didn't suffer, if I didn't know, they're kind of talking about, you know, the death of animals, but she's talking about it like, oh, if I was going to be killed, if I didn't suffer, if I didn't know, then it maybe might not be that big a deal to me. And he's interrupting and saying, does that make it okay if you didn't know? Like, he's not letting her finish. And there's actually quite a lot of literature around man-terruptions, which is what like some of the scholars have labeled men asserting gender dominance while talking with women or with non-binary people. Body language, so they use their body language in really masculine ways. You can see down the bottom left that Earthling Ed is pointing at the person he's talking to, and he seems quite agitated, quite angry, and is very masculine in the way he's talking, with a lot of confidence. And you can also see there in the middle that James Aspey is showing his muscles, which he does a fair bit. And, you know, that's showing that even though he's vegan, he's still like this really masculine man. He's perpetuating hegemonic masculinity, which is a violent ideology, which has impacts for lots of people. And they also use logic, rationality. So they will talk with someone, and this person says, oh, I tried to go vegan, but it was really hard and I felt sick, or whatever they're giving for not being vegan anymore. And the YouTubers will say, well, actually there's been lots of studies, lots of scientific stuff, lots of really logical, rational stuff that says that veganism is really awesome for you, really great for your body, really great for your health. But that emphasis on logic and rationality and science as opposed to personal experiences is a very masculine one. So if you're looking at dichotomies, like logic, rationality sit with masculinity, and feelings and emotions sit with femininity. And so I just thought I would, I'm just about finished, but I just thought I would talk about some of the interesting developments that have happened with these, with a couple of these YouTube channels while I've been looking at them. So I started looking at them like November last year. And so every so often I go and check and see what they're up to. And some really interesting things have happened this year, actually. So when I started looking at Gary Yourofsky's YouTube channel, sort of this time last year, he was really open about the fact that he was a misanthrope. He had some quite racist videos up there. One in particular where he talks about Palestinian people, where he talks about Black people, as if they are particularly agents of the animal industrial complex. So Palestinians are more likely to abuse animals. This is what he was saying, that Palestinians were more likely to abuse animals than Israelis. And if you know anything about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, you know that Israel is so awful to Palestinians, and it's just such a violent, horrific act of neo-colonialism, neo-apartheid that's happening there. And so he was saying that Palestinians, who are a incredibly oppressed people by the Israelis, were more likely to abuse animals, basically, in a nutshell. So he had these videos up there that were like overtly racist, but he was saying like, I'm a misanthrope, I'm not racist, I just hate all humans, without any acknowledgement that saying you particularly hate certain races of humans that are non-white is a racist act. So he, but anyway, so with 2020 particularly, I think it was with the emphasis on Black Lives Matter on the US, he started curating his YouTube channel to look more intersectional. So he started uploading things and removing things that suggested that he was really emphasizing coming at animal rights from an intersectional perspective. And why I think this is interesting is that obviously these YouTubers are curating the image that they show to us. So it's not an accident that these videos ended up on Gary Yourofsky's channel at the time they did. I think that because of Black Lives Matter, he saw that maybe some of the things he had said would not sit well in kind of a hyper-aware, hyper-informed America, and so he removed the most problematic videos and he uploaded some ones that made him look good. And then James Espy, so when I started looking at his channel, it was called James and Carly. So Carly was his girlfriend, fiance at the time. And what I think is interesting about that is I kind of had the suspicion that he added her to the channel to kind of, I don't know, demasculinize his image a little bit. That's just my own suspicion. I have no evidence to say that, but that's kind of what I think happened. But of course, when they broke up, she was removed from the channel and it just became James Espy again. I hope she got some money from him for that. But then so it's just James Espy again. And he's actually started introducing his new fiance, which is like what as if women are just, you can just chuck one out and get a new one and without very many explanations, which I think kind of suggests what his perspective on the women he dates is. Yeah, Carly was easy to remove when she no longer was benefiting him. And I thought I would leave everyone with a kind of more positive ending. So I have included here some of the amazing work that intersectional vegans are doing around the world. So I think that there are awesome people who are doing really awesome work for animals, who are taking into account all the different intersections of oppression and privilege. I'm just not sure that the most popular YouTubers are doing that. Oh, and also what I wanted to say was, as kind of my ending remark, was that the most interesting thing, apart from the being agents of neoliberalism, about the YouTubers is that they're all promoting veganism in the same way. So there's very little difference in what they say. They use the same arguments as each other, and I think they are encouraging vegan activists to use the same arguments as well. So it's all, there's no diversity in the way they talk about veganism or animal advocacy or animal rights activism. And I just think that's a little bit lazy. And as I said before, I know people who know about what happens in the animal industrial complex who don't go vegan for whatever reason. And so there isn't like a one size fits all that will make everyone go vegan. So I think that, so I encourage people who do vegan advocacy to think about their arguments, talk about it with more nuance, and diversify the way they talk about animal advocacy and veganism. But thank you very much again for having me.
Tēnā koe, Cressida, me tō kouhou miharo. That was absolutely amazing. Yeah, those are really important, thoughtful questions that we need to be considering. And yeah, we're running a little bit short time, so I'm going to go straight over to Mark for the questions now. Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Cressida and Catherine. We've got a few questions. The first one was actually from Simone, and it was talking about the previous presentation, but it's a really interesting question. So if you don't mind, Simone, I think we'll leave that one till last, because I think it will tie into what Betty's going to talk about as well, because it's such a big question. But so Simone, your question's coming. We'll do that at the end because it's a good one. But on Cressida's talk, Sarah asked, and I'm going to read this out because it's a little bit long. Sarah asks, do you think that celebrities are disenfranchising possible animal activists who might feel too inexperienced or unworthy to engage with activism when they watch and compare themselves to vegan celebrities? I've met some men who felt very empowered by these videos, but women and other subordinate groups seem to disengage and step back from organising or leadership roles. Cressida.
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I tend to agree with what you're saying, if I've interpreted it correctly. So the other part of my PhD research is I did interviews with women, mostly women, in Aotearoa animal rights scenes, and you know, with quite a few of them, the topic of you know, celebrity Hegans came up, and so many of them were not supportive, and I think that is kind of because they couldn't see the mahi they were doing in these people who were being celebrated in this way, and a lot of the people I talked to were doing like behind the scenes work which goes uncelebrated, but it's so important, and you know, with these Hegans there will be people doing behind the scenes work for them, which is so important as well. So you know, they may be the face, but I'm sure that there are, you know, the mahi of their partners, the mahi of like the people they know, will be going on behind the scenes, and that goes so uncelebrated and so unacknowledged. Yeah, so I think that it is, and I think it's alienating in another way, that if you're not a super extroverted person who likes going and talking to people on the street, that you don't really see your activism, the kind of activism you do at all. And I think we all know here that there are, you know, it takes a community to do what we do, and it's not just people talking to people on the street, taking videos of themselves, putting it up on YouTube. There's a lot of mahi that goes on that looks different to that, and so yeah, I think it is alienating, and also because the most celebrated people are, you know, white, hetero, cis, able-bodied men. I think that if you can't see yourself doing, if you can't see people like you, you're not going to feel like you can do that yourself necessarily. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, and we also had another question from Summer. If I can find the text that she wrote so I get it right. Yeah, Summer asks, is there a way of using YouTube and crowdfunding, things like Patreon and stuff, in a radical and truly disruptive way? So people doing it right, Cressida?
I mean, I hope so. I think that those people doing that mahi wouldn't have been included in my data set purely because they aren't as popular, which is part of the problem, isn't it? It's not just problematic that these people are doing these things, it's also that there are people enabling them by giving them money, by giving them views. Yeah, I'm sure I don't have the answer to that, Sama, but I think that's such an important way of thinking about it, that there are people doing amazing mahi on YouTube and on Patreon. And I don't think that asking for people to fund your activism is necessarily a bad thing, but I think that it's just the people that I've been looking at just need to level up a little bit. But I don't know the answer to that question, but I think there's certainly Summer, I could maybe contact you on email because I think there are some scholars who look at the best way to do activism. That isn't my, like, I'm more of a critical, on the critical end of things. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.